Hello, and this is Tagore Almeida from the Uncultured Company, and welcome to my podcast, A Pint of Imbecile Wisdom, where I talk to everyday people with everyday stories which provide a great inspiration to the rest of mankind. So we've been doing this for a while now, and today I've got with me. I'm very fortunate to talk to this young lady. She's an actor. That's what I was told about her when I first heard her name. But as I've gotten to know her, she's a lot more than that, and we're actually going to be talking about what it's like to have done about 600 shows across the world and then moving into a new exciting domain of the things that she's embracing. So with me, I have today Nishi Toshi. So hi Nishi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Tagore, thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Great. So Nishi, let's start with the basics. Your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and a little bit about your family life and so forth. Yeah.
So I'm based in Bombay. Pretty much always been here. I live in the suburbs. I used to live in a joint family earlier, regular Gujarati Bombay girl, and currently for the last 7 years or so, my parents have moved out. They live in I'm single and very happy to live the life that I'm living in Bombay. I've been really fortunate because I lived the life that I've always dreamt of living in terms of the kind of things that I've wanted to do when there is no one to really sort of put any kind of external influences in terms of how I want to live. So it's a pretty good life. I have like myriad interests, so I do a lot of different things. So it's never a dull day for me. Work.
So we'll come to those. So academically, what's your background? I mean, I know you're a trained actor, but we'll come to that in a minute. But traditionally Indian parents, want us to get educated. So what was that like for you?
So what I remember, I was a very academic child, quite very interested in studies and very studious back in my school days, and always some sort of a ranker somewhere. So very scholarly, bent of mind. And but there was this deep part of me that was always sort of creative but very suppressed. So as I was growing up, I realized that a part of me was veering on making choices a lot towards things that are more creative and more free flowing and stuff like that. So I finished my graduation in psychology, and around that time I took a break. I decided to take a sabbatical, and I said I don't want to do my masters currently. I want to explore more of the world, and I want to travel, and I want to see what all interests me, because there are so many things that I wanted to explore. And my parents are very cool about the whole thing. They said, yeah, why don't you just take a year off, explore all these different things that you want to do. They're very generous like that. So after graduation, I graduated from St. Xavier's College in psychology. And then I took a gap year. So in that gap year, I traveled quite a bit all across India. I did a lot of interesting work with tribal children, with NGOs in rural areas of India as well. And it had a lot to do with life skills training, because that was a space that I sort of really enjoyed. And the idea was to study arts as a therapy, be it theatre, be it drama as therapy, eventually, and kind of find a link between psychology and the arts, not just performing arts, any kind of arts. So that's how the whole exploration sort of began back in 2008. And in that 1 year, when I took a gap year, I trained as an actor. I went back to music in some ways. I went back to teaching. I love teaching. So I conducted a lot of workshops all across India. I started teaching at a few international schools, and I came back to Bombay, and I landed I landed a job with a company that did a lot of this kind of work. And eventually, again, another full year of exploring a lot of creative pursuits, in the editing and things. I was working as a freelance casting director, I was working as a freelance script writer, I was working as the whole gamut, because when you're in the critical field, you have to, and you're exploring. It's best to do as much as possible so that you kind of figure out what your strengths are, your weaknesses are, what you really enjoy doing. And somewhere around 2010, I started teaching in a lot of international schools again, things related to theatre. And when I say theatre, it doesn't really mean, like, a lot of people think theatre is just acting and it's just performance, but it's so much more than that, right? Because it's a lot of life skills. It's almost like you're training your cognitive skills, and which are eventually going to play a big part in your life later on. So I started getting interested in doing theatre in education, which is a completely different field altogether. And that's how the whole journey into education began. And somewhere around 2010, when I was working in a couple of international schools as well, I happened to land a play, a theatre performance, just completely out of the blue. And I was really pressed for time around that time, so I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do it. But one thing led to the other, and I was doing theatre before that as well, but like not commercially or professionally. But in 2010, November is when the first professional production sort of came.
So there's a few interesting things you said about this. So first you said, your creative thing was suppressed for a while, but then fortunately your parents were really encouraging and wanted you to take a year off.
Right.
You traveled around India, and I think that's the best education one can get about looking at life, and learning so much from it. But you, in that year that you took off, you trained as an actor, right?
Right.
Why did you feel the need to go and actually take that dive into training as an actor? What triggered that off? Because I know so many people around the same vicinity that you live in Andheri, who just go to the gym, come back, think they look good, and they think that they've become actors. But you actually went and did. Unfortunately, it's the state of the industry. But and that's why you see there's only a handful of actors who actually stand out in the film industry in Bombay, because people don't understand the depth of acting. But I'm very, very pleased to know that you actually decided that you were going to go and train as an actor. So tell us, why was that important to you, and how did you go about doing that?
So I'll tell you a little bit about the background, what sort of led to that. When I was in college, I was learning French at the Alliance Française, and I was very culturally active. And I used to love performing on stage and participate in all of these. You have your intercollegiate festivals, and it's a very different enthusiasm around that time. So I was very active around in that space when I'm in college. And when I took the gap year, I said, like, the best thing if I want to explore who I am as a person, is to be able to do something like an acting workshop, which is not really geared towards only performing or acting things out, but more to do with understanding oneself better. So a friend of mine who I was very close to around that time, had already done the course. And then my father, who was also dabbling with a little bit of acting around that time, decided to do the workshop as well. And all of them said that if you have the time, this might be a good experience for you, because there's so much more that you sort of learn. And I had already done a lot of theatre workshops beforehand, so I sort of knew that I love the whole exploration around around the self and all the connections that we make as a person, as a performer. That kind of tells us so much more about ourselves. So because I had done a lot of workshops earlier, short-term workshops, I sort of knew that I'm happy to do like a long-term stint. But the focus was never on wanting to be an actor. That was never my focus. Even when I did that one course, it was just because I wanted to explore something about myself. I said, I don't mind trying this out and seeing if I like this space at all. And thankfully, through the course, it was quite a revelation, because it was a revelation in a lot of different ways, not just as a performer, but even as a human being, because there were so many things that we did sort of took us back into our childhood. There are so many sort of activities and things that you do as part of your training process that is very integral to one's self-development.
More than that, also, I think, Nishi, more than that, it actually introduces and teaches you to embrace the discipline of the art.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so discipline, all of that. So I'm talking more in the sense of like the self-development, personal growth space.
Yeah.
Because that was the space that I wanted to explore around that time. It was exciting me quite a bit. And they were wonderful experiences, through the course as well. But as you said, and rightly so, any sort of art or any sort of work that we do, there's always a sort of a discipline involved, which is extremely important. Be it performing arts, be it any sort of like fine arts or any kind of career that you have. There's always like in the performing arts we call it riyaz. So riyaz is not just your practice, but it's also discipline. And there's physical discipline, there's mental discipline, there are emotional disciplines. There's so much of that is involved when you're training to be an actor. But like I said, it was never to become an actor. I never really even thought that I would take this up as a career, but it was just, I guess, something inside me, like a guiding voice was telling me that that's the space I want to be in, and maybe it'll tell me something that will probably guide me further. So I've pretty much always lived by this guiding intuition all my life. So consciously, for the other person, people are wondering, what is she doing? Why is she in this profession? Because she was an academic person, and she was, everyone thought in my family that I was probably going to become like a doctor or somebody in the academic space, and I went on to do something very different. So not everyone understands that, but I guess our own personal inner journeys are our own personal ones.
So how did the first acting gig happen? I know you said it happened accidentally. How did that happen?
So back in 2008, I'd gone to watch a show, and I was alone, and I was walking around the theatre, and the director walked up. He was this veteran director, one of our biggest gurus in our theatre space, Pandit Satyadev Dubey. And he walked up and he said, what are you doing and all of that, and I have to rehearsal, would you like to come and attend? So it was just so ad hoc, I went to the rehearsal and then we got this part, but I couldn't perform at that time because I had got a scholarship to go to France. So I dropped out of that production. This was in, I think, around 2006, 7 or 8. And I took a break, and when I came back in 2009, what were the odds? They were starting another play, and he said, now that you're back in town, why don't you join in? And I sort of got sucked into the whole theatre space. And then in 2010, through the reference of a friend, they were looking to cast for this big theatre production for a festival in Bombay. And I happened to have gone and met the director, and it just sort of like, I guess it was just destined to be. So it just happened out of the blue. Even I didn't realize. I said, okay, this was never part of the plan, but I guess life has its own ways of surprising oneself. So yeah.
So 600 shows later today, around 600 shows all over the world, and here we are talking about you as an actor, an accidental actor. But one of the things I want to talk to you about your acting thing, so you performed with the Shakespeare Company in the UK, where you had a very esteemed member of the audience who saw your performance. I'm not going to mention the name, I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm going to give you the pleasure and see the excitement on your face when you talk about. So how did the Shakespeare thing happen, and tell us who was in the audience for one of your performances?
Sure. So this was, 2010 is when the whole theatre journey started. And the way it works, it's very free-flowing, so you do one show, somebody watches you, they recommend you for another play. And so it just sort of like went from one thing to the other. And by 2012, there was another production, a musical production that I was doing, a story for a song. And the director was commissioned, his name is Mr. Sunil Shanbag. So he was commissioned to direct this play for the Shakespeare's Globe in 2012. So if you remember, there were the Olympics happening in London around that time. And as part of the Olympics, they also had the Cultural Olympics. And and they wanted to celebrate Shakespeare, and so they had 37 different theatre companies from all over the world performing Shakespeare in 37 different native languages. So what was interesting was that from India, and I think India was the only country where they had two languages, which is Hindi and Gujarati. Possibly because they wanted to sort of reach out to the Indian diaspora in London around that time. And this director, my director, was commissioned to do a Gujarati production of All's Well That Ends Well. And it was a very interesting process because, when one thinks of Shakespeare, there's always a very different mindset, because we've done Shakespeare back in school and it's all of these and thous and a very formal sort of way of speaking that people have in their minds. But here when you have All's Well That Ends Well, which is a Shakespearean play, being played in a Gujarati Bhangwadi tradition where people are talking in Thate Gujarati, which is, very archaic. And again, it was a musical production. So it was a very interesting experience just watching the whole thing sort of, from the conception stage to actually watching it being performed for the Gujarati commercial theatre space here in India, in Bombay. Of course, we traveled with it as well. And then also doing it for an international audience. Because then it was a completely different, very interesting experience in terms of the audience also, very different audience. So 2012 June is when we debuted at the Shakespeare's Globe in London, and we had about 5 performances, and it was very, very interesting. I think probably one of the highlights of my theatre career.
Who was in the audience for one of the performances?
So we had a rerun in 2014. There were, out of the 37 companies, there were only about 5 of them called back to do a rerun in 2014 because I believe the reviews were really good at The Guardian around that time. So when we were called back in 2014, we had Dame Judi Dench come and part of the audience, and it was absolutely thrilling, because interestingly she had performed this play during her theatre days as well. And one of our co-producers had worked with her in a film around that time. So that's how she got invited to the show, and then meeting her post the show was so encouraging and deeply inspiring. To know that you're on the same stage, you're performing on the same stage as where Dame Judi Dench did years ago, and it's a very powerful experience. This whole thing of being on stage, and it's as alive as you can feel.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it was very, I'll talk a little bit about the whole London experience at the Globe, because it was absolutely mesmerizing, the fact that you could have 2,000 people in the audience. Almost 80% of them were white, and they did not know Gujarati, so they were following the subtitles that were there, and there were subtitle panels. But for a good 2.5 hours, nobody has moved an inch from the audience, even though they were getting drenched in the rain, because it rains in the evenings in London. And there is this whole part of the Globe Theatre, which is called the Yard, which is open to sky. And of course, you cannot really have umbrellas or anything, because the people behind won't be able to see. So people were getting drenched in the rain for 2.5 hours, committed to watching a performance being played out live, and not even in their own native language. And I think that says a lot about kind of arts culture that they have there, kind of respect they have for the arts.
So Nishi, so we talked quite a bit about your acting. You've also done some. You've also done some films. Have you worked on some films?
Not really. So I did about 2 films which have not seen the light of day. So so that's been. I've done a few like short films and corporate films along the way. A very few ad films. This was all years back, quite a few years ago. And nothing on the film and TV front as of now.
So let's move to something else that you do. One of the other caps that you wear is the middle segment of our chat. Is You went on a scholarship to France, you said, and you're very passionate about learning the French language. You're a certified French language instructor. Tell us about that. What's that got to do with anything in your life?
So again, all of this comes back from college when I had finished school and I was in this whole transition phase. My parents sort of had an epiphany that you're good with languages. Why don't you try learning a foreign language? And this was the time when going to town, going to South Bombay from the suburbs was really fun because you want to explore, traveling alone, commuting alone, and things like that. So when I was in college, I got into the Alliance Française, and I loved the whole experience of learning a foreign language so much that I finished one level after the other in about 5 years of doing multiple levels, and I was juggling a lot around that time. So I was also doing my college classes. I used to work as a tutor around that time as well, along with college and learning French. So I was doing a lot of different things around that time as well. And French as a language is, it's just so much fun. I sort of enjoyed the whole the cultural aspect of learning the language as well. And then I landed this particular, it was an exchange program, come scholarship. And there were about 6 or 7 people from all over India who were sort of chosen for that particular year. And it was interesting because we went to this place called Boulogne-sur-Mer, which is up north in the north of France. And we were working on different themes. So around that time, what I had chosen was environment. So we were doing a lot of environment conservation activities around Boulogne-sur-Mer. And it was some cultural enrichment, language enrichment, meeting 23 different people from all over the world. So it was a very interesting cultural assimilation of sorts. So then that piqued my interest even more. And then I came back, I continued with the French work. I was working as a translator around that time as well. I used to subtitle films and also take on translation projects. And then all of a sudden, 2010, theatre happened. So I mean, although I continued French and I continued French in a very personal sort of a way, I'm back to teaching French now. Again, in a very different way, which I'll talk to you about later. But after the whole theatre experience that came my way, it was interesting to notice that this whole pattern of learning languages and being good with it and picking it up fast, it helped me in my theatrical career. Because here I was juggling plays in Gujarati, juggling plays in Hindi, juggling plays in English, and a lot of them were musicals. And there were days when you'd have a Hindi play at 4 in the evening and a Gujarati play at 9 o'clock in the night. And so you have to literally be very quick and alert with your language skills. And I guess that's when the whole experience of learning different languages sort of really helped me. So I think there's always going to be like some sort of a synergy, across disciplines, which I realized, French never went out of my life and it's come back in a big way now again. But even when I was not doing it consciously, somewhere or the other, this whole language learning was helping. So, and across all of these 600 shows that we did from all over the world, we had all these different languages that we were performing in. Be it the play that I did with Paresha, or any other musical that I did. It's not in the commercial space. There's always been a lot of interdisciplinary crossover experiences I've had.
But now you're a certified French instructor.
Yes.
What does that mean, Nishi?
So I did a lot of certifications over the years, not just in French as a diploma, but I also did my certifications in yoga and wellness, which is from the Santa Cruz Institute of Yoga, which is one of the oldest, in fact, the oldest organized institute in the world for yoga. They also had government exams, which you had to do, which was basically like a standardized government stamp that you get, certifying that you are a certified yoga instructor. So yoga and wellness has been one space, French has been one space, And I also did my certification from the Royal Shakespeare Company to teach Shakespeare to younger audiences and adolescents. So that really sort of added on to my entire teaching, into the whole teaching gamut. Because the more you do, the more connections you make, and the more interdisciplinary synergy. So I've had a lot of different international certifications that I've done.
So talk to us now about, before we touch on the yoga and the wellness, now you've also been an educator, and and it's amazing what you do in that space, right? How you combine the passion for educating kids with the acting as well. So tell us a little bit about that, Nishi.
Sure. So the education bit, yes, I'm absolutely passionate about education. Even I guess it happened even before the whole performing arts journey happened with me. And in fact, it was one of the most important avenues that I wanted to explore years ago. And what I'm most interested in is to understand and explore the whole subject of life skills. Because ultimately, it is your life skills that will determine what you do with your life and how you live your life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So my entire educational journey has sort of always had that at the back of my mind. I've always had the zeal to want to work on life skills with children and with adolescents whenever I'm training them. So even though I use the medium of theatre or language or even in regular counseling sessions that I do with kids and with adolescents, at the back of the mind, it's always a lot to do with training them mentally, training them emotionally, because ultimately the attitude that they grow up with in life is what will determine what their future is going to be like. So as an educator, it's been very enriching to have had so many years of experience teaching drama and theatre in such a profound sort of way. I used to work with a lot of rural and tribal sections as well as international schools in Bombay. Very different cultures. I started, my first school was in, I think, 2010. And then I've done about a little more than 20 schools after that, the last 11 years or so. And very different cultures, but it's amazing to see what kind of connections children make in the classroom. Because nowadays, with the whole advent of new curriculums and IB and IGCSE, and a lot of schools are very open to doing, exposing the children to the arts. And you will not believe, mostly when people have their classes in the morning, your important classes like a science or a maths or an English in the morning, I have always pretty much had my drama classes the first class in it. And kudos to the schools, because they realize the importance of having a platform like this where the kids can just be themselves, they can express themselves, their imagination, their creativity. First thing in the morning. It's like when we used to be in school, we'd always have like a science class or English or a math class, because they think that kids are fresh in the morning and that's when they sort of need to get their attention around that time. So what these people realized was that when they had drama, they were so energized and focused throughout the day that they were a lot more productive than the days when they didn't have it. So it's very encouraging to see that like the whole culture around this is changing quite a bit, and people realize the importance of these subjects. Because see, drama, like I said, is not just about acting or performance, but there is so much of life skills involved. There is so much of creative expression and catharsis that is involved in this kind of a classroom. So now what I've done is, last year I was working on. So one thing I love doing is taking two different disciplines and sort of merging them together. So last year I came up with a course on French theatre. So I sort of took both the best of both worlds, which is training in drama and creative expression, and training in language, which makes it even more interesting as a process to learn language. And then I put them both together, and I created this very interesting program, which when we did a version of it last year. The kids seem to really love it because it's a very interesting way of going about learning a language. So now what I'm trying to do is, sort of like multidisciplinary synergy and working on them.
So how does the last element I want to talk to you about what you do before we go into the third segment of the chat, how does yoga and wellness fit into the whole thing, and why do you embark on that?
So, interestingly, my mother has been a yoga instructor for over 25 years now. And there has been a culture of, yoga and meditation at home, which I've sort of grown up in. But it was more to do with self-preservation and working on oneself, and not so much about wanting to teach yoga for me. But 3 years ago, I just had some time off and I said, it'd be interesting to do a course in yoga and see what kind of connections I can make within myself around that time. So when I did the course, it went off really well. It was, I did all my certifications in it. But the idea was never to become a yoga instructor. Just like the idea with doing acting projects was never to become an actor. To train as an actor was never to become an actor. It was just a lot of self-exploration that I was doing. And it sort of helped me, of course, because it's a personal practice for me more than like as a career orientation or something like that. And as a personal practice, it really helps because it's a mental, emotional, and physical connection and fitness activity. So it's really helped me over time. But I don't look at it so much as a career or a profession.
How are you blending that with acting and life skills that you're educating kids with? Does it fit in there, and how does it, if it does?
So a lot of meditation and mindfulness activities, you might have seen a lot of mindfulness activities happening for children of late, because I guess everyone realizes that there's so much stimulation around and kids sort of really need to find their own little inner compass. So a lot of mindfulness and meditation related activities sort of fall into the work that I do, because whenever I'm doing like my theatre or drama training class also, we sort of always end it with a mindfulness or a meditation related activity, which sort of centers their focus and calms them down, calms their energies and whatever they're sort of going through. So definitely has a lot of impact. And in fact, even for me personally as an actor, after I started doing yoga and meditation more seriously, I found myself a lot more centered on stage.
Absolutely.
Than what I used earlier. So
I can relate.
Always so much happening around you, and so many energies are affecting you all the time. There's so much influence in all of that, and sort of you lose balance somewhere. So when I started my personal practice, I realized that it was actually helping me focus and be a lot more alert on stage as well.
I recently started on a journey of doing Himalaya Kriya yoga, but just over a month now, and I already feel the difference. I find myself more focused and more calm when I'm at work and so forth. It's a great thing. So Nishi, that's great. And there's so many hats that you're doing. Let's now come back to a little more personal stuff about you. Yeah. What were some of the challenges that you faced in this very amazing journey that you've been on so far? And what were the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them? Because maybe one of our listeners is going through the same thing or might go through the same thing. So let's talk a little, because I'm sure it couldn't have been an easy journey and easy ride all the way along. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So firstly, I think the most I've had is because it's this whole space that I'm in, the creative space that I'm in, it was a very new journey for me. I never had a mentor. I never had anyone from the family who had probably done something like this and sort of knew the pros and cons of living the life that I live. A lot of my experiences, like I said, have been accidental and ad hoc. So that also sort of threw me, because a part of me always wanted to sort of I always had an impression that I could control things and that things were in my hand and I could do what I wanted and be where I wanted. But what life sort of threw back at me were all of these ad hoc experiences. And I think like a big part of me, I could say maybe like, you sometimes make all these subconscious choices. Those choices put me on this path where I decided to flow. But somewhere, and it always happens, somewhere along the way, you lose the motivation, you lose the whole, purpose and the first actual intent of why you're doing what you're doing. And so many different aspects are at play in whether a particular project works or not, especially in the creative space. You might know because you're also you've also done a lot of your creative filmmaking work. But there are so many different aspects as to why a project will work or not work. You might have done your best, you might have given your best, but the project probably won't see the light of day, or it will just sort of not work out in the way that you plan it, and all of that. So dealing with those aspects when things are not really working out for you, rejection, like a biggest part of my life, being rejected all the time at every audition. And there are so many times where they tell you that no, it's not the performance, or it's just the look that's not working, or sometimes it's the look that's working, but something's not, you're not being able to crack. And the unfortunate thing with like the Indian casting space is that not a lot of people give you feedback in terms of what needs to be done, or it's very I'm sure it's getting better, and it is, but it's still sort of like not very responsibly organized in terms of giving actors feedback as to where what is supposed to be done, and what can be done better next time and things like that. So a lot of the times you might feel like you're good, but you're left in a lurch because you don't know what has worked or what has not worked. And there are so many of my sorry.
No, I know. Oh, sorry, I know some of these casting actors. Had the, I won't say pleasure, but I've had the opportunity to work with these casting actors, and I'm sometimes wondering what has made you qualified to be a casting actor, because I think that's also another part of the equation that we need to look at it in our industry. But look, I agree with you. I think that the challenges are really for someone in your field is the rejection. And and many a times I've seen with my own eyes, Nishi, where a lot of these young actors, men and women, are inclined to compromise on so many levels because they're chasing a dream which they don't understand why they're chasing it. They're chasing for the wrong reasons, But unfortunately, look, we can't change the world. But that's one thing I would definitely say to anyone listening to this particular episode is, don't compromise on your values and your art and your skills and so forth. That's important. So Nishi, what's on the table for you right now as we're talking? So what's happening in your life? Actor, educator, French instructor, yoga, well-being. What's going on in your world right now?
So, sure. Before we move on, I just want to add a few things to the last question.
Sure, please do. Yeah.
If there's anybody who's listening there and kind of if this could help, what has worked for me is the fact that because I have diversified and done different things, I've always had multiple sources of income, and financially you need to really be sound enough if you want to explore yourself in the creative space. Because somewhere or the other your survival instincts will always kick in, and they sort of interrupt with your entire creative journey as well. So I have been sort of trolled and told all my life that you're doing too many things, you're not focused, this, that. But I realized that, all of us are different, all our personalities are different. If you feel that you're the kind of person who is looking for something else in life, I'm not only looking at acting or teaching as a profession or a career. The entire idea is to eventually self-actualize. And if that's my purpose, then I have to be able to explore as much as I can, because it is a dive into my own self that I'm taking. And through that, there are so many different deeper, connections that I'm making, which are actually helping me live a better, more productive and more centered life for myself. So for anyone who's watching, I think it's very important that you have multiple sources of income, or at least have certain skills in place before you want to try out in the acting world or any creative field, with writing or direction or whatever. Because if you don't have that, there's somewhere or the other there will be times when you'll be demotivated. You feel like I'm doing so much, but nothing. Sort of there's no breakthrough with anything. And that demotivation space is a bit sort of tricky to be in if you don't know how to handle your emotions around that time.
That's
emotional management.
That's a very good piece of advice you just said, actually. Having some source of a steady income coming in, so that you give yourself that safety.
And it doesn't matter. People will tell you that you shouldn't do 10 different things, but that's for people who are doing jobs or have that one sort of a career where they're only focusing on their job or one task at hand. But when you're a creative person, your mind functions very differently. So you're not going to be able to work in like some sort of like a structural space, And especially if you are good at multiple skills, why not make use of them? Why not sort of monetize them? Because you'll be doing a big disservice to yourself if you're not using the skills in the right way.
So
even if someone tells you don't.
So what's on the table right now for you? What's the current?
So things change every year. Before the pandemic, it was very different. But I had very interesting experiences in the last 1 year, 2020-21. Very deep inner experiences as well. And the idea is that, I have been away from social media for so long because I had my reasons for it. But this year I want to sort of come back to social media and tell my story and share my inner experiences in a big way. So that's one thing that I'm looking at doing. Apart from
we have a common friend to do that for you.
Yes, Rishi.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So besides the social media,
Yes, absolutely. So that's one game I'm trying to up at the moment. Because I've had some very profound inner shifts, and one of the biggest reasons is the fact that I've sort of been away from social media influences for a really long time. So I've sort of figured out my own personal truth, and this year I want to sort of take that up that game a little bit more. Apart from that, I'm juggling with a very interesting day job that I have at a school currently, where I teach the theatre arts. And I've been voicing for some very interesting projects, which are Spotify original shows. These are audio shows for Spotify and the thriller podcast. But it's like watching probably a Netflix series or any other series, but in an audio format. So I've been voicing for those lately. A lot of them have already been released. Some are releasing next month. This is all on Spotify and Audible original. So voicing work is really fun for me because that's something that I've been doing over the years as well. Voicing and dubbing and giving my.
Is there a show that we can listen? Our audience can listen to on Spotify?
Yes, absolutely. So there is on Spotify original, the one that we are currently doing is called Darka Raz with Dr. Phobia, where I play a vamp. She's like this mysterious girl who's sort of like blackmailing this main protagonist, this psychologist, Dr. Phobia. So that's a really interesting experience because I'm playing something that I'm, it's a very different sort of space to be in, performing a negative character. So that's one. There is one called I Hear You, where I'm doing episodic shows. There's one called Master Pose, which is doing very, very well, and I'm doing episodic series there as well. With Dr. Phobia, I'm doing about 13 episodes for their second season. And there's one on Audible original called Mine and Yours, which released in 2019. And now they're coming up with the second season of that as well. So I have a big part of that. So I do a lot of voicing work because I speak in different languages and have a bent of singing and stuff like that. I have a experience in that. So it sort of just culminates into this whole space very well. So voicing work is one thing. So there's never a dull day. In the morning I have my day job at school, and in the evenings I'm taking teaching French or teaching English as a foreign language, as a second language, and doing voicing work at some point in the week. So a lot of different things that I'm doing currently. Also working on a book, but that's going to take some time for
a book. Wow, what's this book about? Tell us about this book.
I started working on a collection of yoga stories for children a couple of years ago.
Oh wow!
But I finished 2, and then I realized I might as well make it like a volume of different stories. So I'm working on that currently. That's for children, and there is one that I'm trying to work on for, which is a little bit like for the older age group. But that's going to take a little bit of time. It's to do with a lot of experiential living and the kind of cognitive connections that we make when we're on a creative.
What's interesting, Nishi? I have a friend of mine, as is my yoga instructor, who's a dear friend. I'll be podcasting him about the importance of Himalaya Kriyas sometime in the next week or so. But have a listen to that podcast when it comes out. I'll let you know when it's out. If you feel a connect with it, I can more than happily introduce you, and he can give you a lot more stories about experiences of the children and the breathing exercise and what the benefits of it. But coming back to you now, Nishi. So you've got all this happening. What are your aspirations and your dreams? Come on, you've done all of this. There must be still some stuff that you haven't done yet. I don't know. Open heart surgery or something.
It's interesting you say that. An open heart surgery from a very spiritual perspective, for sure. You're right. There are a lot of things that I've done, but like I said, the way I look at life is very different from what someone else would, and which is why not everyone gets it. But I am just looking to find my own personal truth, who I am at the core of me. That is not to do with my work. That is not to do with my career, my profession, or any external identity.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that's not an external identity like a name or a race or a culture that I'm from. But the higher truth and the deeper truth within me. And I've had some sort of very interesting mystical experiences, especially of late. And like I said, the idea is to do all of these different things because eventually I want to self-actualize. And life has been very kind to me because, I have a lot of things sorted out. I don't have any sort of like survival issues or anything, because what happens is when you're stuck at that, it's like the Abraham Maslow's, the pyramid. You're stuck at your survival issues. There's not much that you can, you have a very different outlook and perspective on life. For me, it's very different. I sort of want to reach and figure out that the higher truth as to who I am at the core of me. And I do all of these different things because it brings me closer to my own truth. So that journey, that inner journey, that whole experiential journey within myself is something that I'm looking at in a big way because that's what drives me to do whatever I do. But it's a lot of it is flow. I'm in a complete surrender and flow space. I know the universe has my back because there has been so much like enriching. Yeah. There's been a lot of enriching experiences that I've had. By now I've traveled the world. We've done like 5 continents. We've traveled across UK, US, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, length and breadth of India. I've sort of done a lot of travel in that sense, and there's so much inside me that I want to share with people in terms of the experiences, the kind of mistakes I've made in my life, and the kind of things that I realize now. So all of that is on the cards, but I think more than anything else, it's just a very deeper experiential journey that I'm
one thing I would tell my audience to take away from this episode is not just the fact that you've done so many things and why it's important for survival, but I love what you just said, that your aspiration and your dreams is to spend more time finding who you are, looking within. Because once you do that, then whatever you come across in life, or what, as you said, the universe throws at you, you're in a much stable position to know who you are and where you fit into what the universe is giving you. So best of luck with that, Nishi. Absolutely best of luck with that. And it's been absolutely so beautiful just talking to you, and just the depth and the way you look at things, and the way you've been doing stuff. And I wish you all the best in everything that you do. Can't wait to hear you on Spotify. Can't wait to see you on the new things that you do. And hopefully when I'm in Bombay, see you on stage as well, if I have the opportunity to do that. But best of luck, and I think you really are an inspiration to a lot of people, not just to women and not just people going into acting, but you're just an inspiration all around. And so thank you so much for being with us, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Igor. It has been really interesting to, share this whole story in a very free-flowing manner, because I haven't quite done it like that before, because like I said, I've always been so away from social media that not a lot of people know what I do and why I do what I do. So the journey starts with this particular interview with you, because it sort of gives me the impetus to try and share the story a lot more with people around. So thank you for all your encouragement and all your insightful questions. It made me think and sort of express my insights as well. So thank you for the opportunity. It's very kind of you.
Pleasure.
And sorry for the delay. Sorry for the delay as well.
That's okay. No, that's fine. It was worth it. It was worth it, Nishi.
I think so too. I
hope so. Yeah. So thank you very much, and I really hope that I'm going to be putting all your links onto the descriptions of our podcast, so people can reach out and hear more about everything that you do. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Cool.
And thank you for doing this, because it's such a lovely way to sort of let your story out into the world, So
I hope so.
I will definitely look out for all the different interviews that you're going to do next week.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking time out.
My pleasure, Nishi.